Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Aishani and I work at Veditum as an associate, and I'm also joined by Ria and Siddharth from Veditum today. Welcome to the fourth conversation session today. Um, we'll begin by learning a little bit about Veditam's work, which is interdisciplinary. It is situated at the intersection of environmental and social justice. Our focus extends from grassroots interventions to community making and awareness building and influencing policy change. Veditam's journey started with our founder Siddharth walking for around 3,000 kilometers along the Ganga, which inspired the Moving Upstream project and the fellowship. And the fellows have walked along, experienced, and documented multiple Indian rivers. The other project of Veditam is India Sand Watch, which is an open data project to collect, collate, and archive data on sand mining. And the project aims to improve accountability, enable and inform further research, reporting, and legal action. It offers possibilities to support environmental and social work around sand mining through new imaginations. And Sediment Stories is one such imagination. Since our work deeply involves looking at sand, we wanted to open dialogues with people from various disciplines to understand the diverse role of sand in the environment and our lives. So, where does sand come from? Where does it go? How does it play a role in different ecosystems? What are the governance mechanisms to regulate sand mining? Are there any alternatives? What role do citizens, scientists, and civil society play? So, join us today for this conversation and the other series of conversations that will happen as we navigate the journey of sediments from creation to extraction. For the session today, we are joined by Avli Verma, who will be talking to us about inland waterways. Avli is a researcher at Manthan Adhyayan Kendra, where she has been examining the development of India's inland waterways program for the past 6 years. Her work focuses on understanding the socio-ecological impacts of emerging infrastructure projects on river ecosystems and enhancing accountability and environmental governance in this sector. Avli holds an MPhil in Planning and Development from IIT Bombay and an MSc in Environmental Sciences from JNU Delhi. Avli will be speaking today about the topic Clearing the Path with Blurred Vision, how dredging shapes our rivers and ecosystems. Um, yes, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Avli, also. Uh, and welcome. Avli, maybe we can begin by knowing a little bit about you and your work and your interest on sediments, on waterways.
Thanks, Ashani, for this very kind introduction. Hello, my name is Avli, as introduced by Ashani. Mm, I've always been interested in, like, largely in the issues related to water. And it's been almost 6 years of experience with Manthan Adhyayan Kendra, which is an independent center looking at water and energy related issues in India for the last, I think, more than 2 decades now. Working with Manthan is how I got introduced to the topic of inland waterways. And that's when I got to understand the interventions, the scope of interventions with regards to navigation, now tourism, and other emerging new sort of infrastructure which is coming up on rivers, and trying to understand does how does one look at it from the lenses of equity, from the lenses of transparency, accountability, environmental governance, but also trying to understand, because in this very project, which is about rivers being used as inland waterways, which is to say that uh, rivers being used as a medium or a fairway for transportation of big ships, barges, cruises. and also trying to understand how does this development sort of intersects with other usages, other uses, other allocations of water, dependence on water, and in what way does it impacts the underwater domain, which is something which is not really clearly understood, mainly because a lot of changes happen in the underwater domain. So it's very difficult to assess impacts. The impacts are not visible through a terrestrial eye. You really need to develop a, a an eye of the sort of an ecosystem. So that sort of approach is something which is missing right now when we look at these infrastructural developments. So these are the sort of basic drives or questions that I've been looking at for the last 6 years. And I'll be primarily talking about my experience of studying the inland waterways, the National Waterways Program in India. So yeah, we'll start from there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a good sort of segue, and we'd like to know a little bit more about what is the process of rivers being used as waterways, and what are the sort of environmental impacts because of that. And we've heard a lot of claims and sort of justifications about it being sort of promoted as eco-friendly and sustainable. So maybe you could shed some light from your experiences and studies.
Right. So yeah, like what I mean by rivers being used as inland waterways, uh, it is something which Manthan has been noticing since 2014, 2015 onwards, and prior, and probably like even before that. So it was in 2014 when the Jalmarg Vikas project was introduced in the speech of the finance minister, saying that the Ganga waterway will be revitalized. The capacity, it needs to be augmented for capacity, which means that heavier vessels need to be transported on River Ganga. Um, Post that, we saw the National Waterways Bill, and then we saw the National Waterways Act in 2016, which mainly sort of converted 111 river systems, or like estuaries, canals. If you look at it separately, there are around 111 national waterways, which are spread across more than 138 such rivers or estuaries or canals. So earlier, this sort of act was a separate legislation passed in the passed in the parliament. Through that, we earlier had five national waterways, and probably if I use the screen, I can show you the extent or the scope of these waterways, and it would be probably more clear. Can you see my screen, the map on the screen now?
Yeah, I can see.
So if you see, like there are these are the 111 national waterways which are declared now in 2016. As you mentioned, these waterways are actually claimed, like the main sort of announcement or the hype around these waterways development, and to develop it from right down the modal capacity, meaning that uh, how much of the traffic is concentrated on rivers in India is, and coastal shipping in India is around 2%. And through the Amrit Kal vision of 2047 and the newer announcements, these modal shift has to be taken to 5% or 10%. Around 500 million metric tons of cargo is to be transported, and most of this cargo is going to be coal or bulk goods like cement, fertilizers, your hazardous goods, chemicals, all those sort of things. So all these things are coming on waterways with the claims that this is the most environment friendly, cost effective, because it saves the cost. If you're running your transportation on water, if you're sending big vessels on water, you can in one go, and I'm trying to explain it in simplistic terms. In one go, you can send what you can send in 20 different trucks. So if we are taking like very simplistic 100,000 tons capacity vessel, then one vessel would cut the cost of so much trucks running. And also because it uses the buoyancy of water, it uses the medium as water, there is significant cost cutting when traveling downstream. But that doesn't mean that all waterways are cost effective, they're cheap, or they are sustainable. And this is what we will explore in the talk as we talk about other things as to what is it that is required for the development of the waterways. For example, just converting it through an act into a national waterway doesn't automatically make it environment friendly, cost effective, and sustainable. What you're going to do in those waterways, and what kind of interventions are you going to bring, and what are the processes you have set up to monitor those interventions and assess impacts, would sort of determine if these waterways are environment friendly, and that has to be assessed on case to case basis. As you're seeing, like 111 national waterways, it seems like a grand plan. But out of these, only 63 are only 63, not only 63, 63 national waterways are not viable for cargo tourism or passengers. And this is because there is no depth in those rivers, or there's no scope of infrastructural development, in the sense that there is no industry to which these goods can be catered to or transported to, or there is no water in those rivers to sustain this movement for considerable number of days in a year. Only 26 national waterways are found viable for cargo and passenger movement, and it also includes tourism related activities. And only in 13 of these national waterways we have seen some movement. Just to very briefly come to the point that this national waterways development is also intrinsically linked with the regional connectivity of India with neighboring countries. For example, Nepal, there was a whole sort of program to connect Nepal, India, and Bangladesh through waterways, through using these rivers, Gandak and Kosi. There is an active channel of connectivity between India and Bangladesh using the Indo-Bangladesh protocol route, which goes in the vicinity of Sundarbans, and then it connects to National Waterway 2 as well as to National Waterway 16. And in between, there are more sort of protocol routes which facilitate movement through the rivers in this stretch. There's also some movement coming of stone from Bhutan through Nepal and through Assam, and then to Bangladesh. There is also the Sitwe port, which has come up in Myanmar, and the connectivity between Manipur, Mizoram, and Bangladesh is also explored. Similarly, there is a new tender, latest tender, which is sort of a revitalized sort of an effort to bring about regional connectivity, connecting all these waterways together, so that there is a seamless movement of goods through water, and this connection could be utilized further for connectivity and transportation of freight goods. So we need to also look at it in this perspective, that this is in strategic national interest, but also with regards to what does it mean? What does it mean for the rivers in India? Because rivers in India, they are very different, and the sort of interventions, when I'm talking about all of these things, the interventions which are there in the rivers of India are also very, very different. For example, if you see in Mandavi, which is National Waterway 68 in Goa, this is a iron ore barge on Mandavi. So it varies from 2,000 tons to 3,000 tons. We've seen 8,000 tons vessels in Amba River, which is a small estuary in Maharashtra. So 8,000 tons of vessel carrying coal and iron ore coming to the estuaries and delivering all these material to industries. We'll see it in the next slide. But also coming to like these big cruises which have come up. For example, you must have seen or followed the hype around the Ganga Vilas, which is the longest cruise covering 52 river systems together, and of course going from Banaras till Dibrugarh. Then if you look at the waterways in Assam, they also show you a very different picture as to like how waterways are required for people in terms of regular movement crossing the banks. But here we don't see as much of the big barges, but a large number of boats which are used by locals, most of which don't have the facilities. As you can see, like they use like traditional ramps, wooden ramps. There is no facility for berthing of these vessels. There is no facility of people using the ramps. It's all like people help each other to reach these boats. Coming to National Waterway 10, here you can see this is one waterway of 19 kilometer of stretch, which contributes to around 21% of all cargo movement in the country. Consistently for the last 5-6 years, if you see this particular stretch of the river is being heavily utilized, and mainly by the Jindal Steel plant here, which basically gets its big cargo of coal at the sea anchorage, and from there uh, through lighterage cargo through small vessels. But these small vessels are small in terms of comparison with the Panamax vessels which are there in the sea. But these, for the estuarine area, imagine a 8,000-ton vessel plying in this river, and around 171 of them are projected in the coming years. I think 2030 is the target. But if you see, it's not only JSW, there is a PNP port which sort of caters to the electricity, the thermal coal, which is transported from PNP port to the thermal power plants of Maharashtra.
Sorry, Avli, have you been changing the slides? We are not able to see if the slides
Oh,
have been
oh,
changed.
are you not seeing the Amba waterway slide
We
map?
can see the map of India.
Oh, so I'll just stop share and share again, maybe.
Yeah, maybe that will work.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, you can see the Google Earth.
Yeah. So here you can see the JSW plant. This is the stretch of the river that I was talking about. Here is the PNP port, which also sort of handles coal for thermal power plants in Maharashtra, in Madhya Pradesh. There's also a proposed unit of Adani Cement, which is going to come up, which is going to process coal, fly ash, and cement. So you can see like just a 19-kilometer stretch of a national waterway is being extensively used for all these goods, and this is a tidal estuary. You won't be able to guess, but at some point this used to be a very productive river system, but right now the DPRs of this waterway, they claim that there is no fishing activity. There is no, although people are fishing, but they claim that there is no fishing activity on this river, and because there is such extensive movement of coal and fly ash and iron ore on this stretch, that there is no meaning in giving any importance to fishing in this estuary, because already it is polluted. So they use the double-edged sword to one, by impacting the fishing population here in the first place, and then further off not mitigating these and using the clause that there's already like less fishing in this tidal estuary, whereas naturally this should be the most productive stretch of the Amba River in Maharashtra. Now, coming to the claims that you spoke about, of course, they are cost effective, they're environment friendly, sustainable modes of transport are the claims of the government. They say that this is the safest mode of cargo for transportation of goods. There would be less traffic congestion on roads, less road accidents as more freight, heavier goods get transported to water, and there would be employment generation. But as we've been seeing that not all waterways are environment friendly, as it is like sort of being studied by the IWAI, Inland Waterways Authority of India, which is the main nodal agency for developing these waterways. We've also seen through their studies, the studies that they tendered, they also found that not all waterways are even viable. Forget about cost effectiveness. And also the impacts in the underwater domain are inadequately assessed. So we can't really say like what is sustainable, what is environment friendly in this aspect.
Right. Thank you for sort of clarifying these claims. Is there more that you wanted to sort of clarify or add to this?
Yeah. So you
Yeah,
asked
please.
about like what does it mean initially as to like what uh, interventions are required for a river to be converted into a national waterway. Although there is a proper definition of what a national waterway should be, which is mentioned in the official reports of like in terms of their length, capacity, and water availability, and all those things, and also what kind of levels of capacity, like classes of national waterways there could be. So all those things are there in the official reports of Inland Waterways Authority of India. But the primary requirement, if a waterway is declared by an act of parliament as national waterway, uh, it needs to be developed. Not all rivers in India have water or have the required depth or has the infrastructure which is required to store the cargo, to have approach roads, to have facilities which help in storage and handling of loading unloading of cargo. So the primary requirement being depth, inadequate depth and width, and you have to correct like the bends in the rivers and any sort of hard strata that you encounter in that particular depth. So all these things are mainly done by dredging, which is the integral component of developing the national waterways. Some other techniques like bendoling, river straightening, using bamboos at a certain uh, uh, angle to divert water, all those things, and some experimental things are experimental interventions are also used. But mostly the development of national waterways in India, where they are operational, they're mainly using the intervention of dredging, which is to dig out the sediments which are there in the river, and creating a sort of a way in the water to transport their vessels carrying goods, carrying passengers to and to cater to tourism, etc. And it depends on the capacity of the vessel. So depending on what kind of capacity of vessel you want to run for how much distance, and through surveyed bathymetric surveys, you come to this finding the best possible way in the river to transport your barge or vessel. But that also means, because rivers are such dynamic systems, these channels or the best sort of routes keep changing, and hence they are supposed to be like studied, and bottlenecks, so-called bottlenecks, which are sand charge, sedimentation, all those things have to be removed from the way of the route. And water availability, like very basic, you need at least 300 days of the year in terms of water availability, which is to be ensured mostly by existing proposed and in some cases in terms of proposing barrages and dams on the rivers to make them navigable.
Right. Yeah, thank you for like setting a really good background and understanding of what waterways mean and how sort of rivers need to be molded, and what dredging being such an crucial part to developing waterways. Maybe you can highlight a little bit more on dredging and how does it happen and what are the impacts of dredging on river ecology and livelihoods of people living there.
Yeah, so dredging, as I said, like essentially it means you're digging out sand and sediment from the river. And of course, you need to think about what to do with the sand and sediment that you are taking from the river, because many of the Himalayan rivers where these waterways are proposed, for example, the Ganga Waterway, the exemplary flagship project, the Ganga Waterway, the amount of sand that comes in Ganga is insane. Like you can't really imagine the quantity of sand that the river gets. And of course, it has ecological functions. It is a basis for the aquatic habitats. It's basis, like I'm sure you must have seen and heard about these conversations in the earlier sediment stories as to like how sand is important for to sustain very many non-human beings and also human beings. Like we see fisher folks taking proper shelter in a sand jar and trying to understand the ways of the river, using that space to cook, to eat, to rest. And also people live on sand jars. We've seen it in Assam, we've seen it in Bengal. So there's no this thing about how sand is important in this aspect, but uh, how dredging shapes it is, so that there are two kinds of dredging. First time, when you try to create a channel in the river, and for the very first time when you want, like say 2 meter depth in the river, what you'll the interventions that you'll do to create and deepen that channel are going to be called as capital dredging, which is the very mostly, it's said to be the very first sort of intervention. And after that, the once you've gotten your channel or the fairway, then the periodic dredging, because the water brings sand all the time, there are floods. And even without that, there is like, I can show you one particular incident in the expert committee which discussed the dredging component in Brahmaputra. So if you take a look at it, just 1 second, let me just share screen. You can
Yeah.
see like the sort of things that even the experts are talking about when it comes to dredging. So, for example, this is a proper screenshot
Mhm.
where Inland Waterways Authority of India has asked for its own experience with regards to dredging work being done in India on Brahmaputra, and they said that they started it and they're doing it at only critical locations. Uh, Working capacity of the dredger is 1.25 lakh cubic meter per year, so that means that much of sand it's capable of getting out of the river. But they noted that dredging alone in the river channel for flood moderation, this is for flood moderation, which is a seasonal this thing. But imagine this being done for waterways development, which requires a sustained depth for your scheduled cargo transportation. Um, they said that
And,
this is going to
Avli, is
be
it possible to switch to full screen? It's more visible.
okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, so here you can see like they have mentioned by themselves that the dredge channel has a tendency to get filled up due to continuous flow of silt in the river. Even the experience of the water resources department in Assam, it also noted that as soon as like they're removing the silt, it's coming back up, and the dredge channels were again silted up in the subsequent flood waves. Dredging activity was discontinued. But other experiences in this report also say that this is not a viable option, meaning that the amount of money that you'd be spending to create this waterway through dredging, it won't really lead you anywhere, as it's going to be going to be a cost intensive sort of an activity. And also you need to like continuously do this sort of periodic dredging in Brahmaputra. I also wanted to show you, share with you certain links which probably you can explore by yourself. One second, I'll just share my screen again.
As you maybe share your screen, I'll invite others to put in questions, any questions that you have in the chat.
Yeah.
We'll take it up at the end of the conversation.
Can you see my screen though?
Yeah, we can see some text and 3 Twitter links.
Yeah. So what I wanted to lead you on to was, so the impacts of dredging do include like increase in turbidity, which is like visibility, which sort of influences the visibility, and also the amount of sunlight penetration in the river and the different liminal layers. It also creates underwater noise, some impacts on riverine morphology and ecology. It's basically like destroys aquatic habitats, affect fish population, because all these impacts are happening continuously, where all these aquatic species reside and use for different kind of functions, which we'll see in the next slide, and also impacts on the livelihoods of fishermen. Uh, and uh, like imagine, like of course like dredging is to be done very in a very monitored planning, with a monitored planning in protected areas. But we all know that the species that we are trying to like specially protect, although all species are important, uh, they don't only dwell in those protected areas. They actually move around and go, are spread within the entire ecosystem. So when we talk about Gangetic dolphins, they're not only limited to the Vikramshila dolphin sanctuary. We've spotted them in Brahmaputra, we've spotted them in Ganga, even when the vessels were sort of plying. So what do you do of these impacts of continuous periodic sort of dredging, which is maintenance dredging, in these environments which also host a range of important species? Also critically sensitive ecosystems. What about estuaries, which are the most productive part of the river systems? What about wetlands, which we will see in one of these slides are used as a cause as to why dredging is not getting completed, because wetlands are now protected. Uh, so the reason I wanted to share these links with all of you is for you to explore like what dredging looks like in different ecosystems. Like this is not a entirely proper sort of representation, but these are the recent dredging activities which I could find on the IWAI's Twitter channel. And following these links, you can see that the dredging takes place in night, how they are doing it in Kerala, how they're doing it in Brahmaputra. So these links could be useful for you to, I'm sorry, for you to maybe take a look at now or later. I can also share them in the chat later.
Yeah, we will send these links to everyone through
Yeah.
email. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've changed to a different slide. Ashani, is that
Yeah.
visible?
You can see
Yeah, so
the, yeah.
as I was talking about wetlands now, because for example, in Kerala, there are wetlands, there wetlands which are also protected through Ramsar regulation, and there are lakes which are critically very important ecologically also. And now there are regulations to protect them. Earlier, probably earlier, National Waterway 3, which is in Kerala, they're doing capital dredging, and there's a particular section of capital dredging that intending to do for the last many years actually. And in 2019-2020, their annual report reports that the delay, like they're not able to do the dredging because of various issues related to disposal of dredged material, demand for extra bank protection, because when you do dredging, a lot of the sand sort of sinks and it makes the bank very very fragile. And they also want a dredge spoil to not be put on where they're uh, putting their nets, fishing nets. And so that's mentioned that frequent stoppage of works and litigations by local people and objections from the fishermen. So this is just around dredging, and this is a very small stretch. There are also IWAI is also saying that, and this is not for National Waterway 3 in Kerala, which is the West Coast Canal, but also in National Waterway 8 and 9, which are the adjoining part of National Waterways sort of system, viable National Waterways in Kerala. There also they're saying that these new rules for protection of wetlands are making it further impossible to identify disposal sites for material dredged from national waterway. So you can see that it's a long drawn process even when it comes to disposal of dredged material. We will talk about it more and we can probably discuss it more in questions also. But again, just to show you what we see in Brahmaputra, what we saw in Brahmaputra, we went. This is in Guwahati, where they are developing this national waterway, the riverfront of this thing. But also, this is National Waterway 2, where all these dredging pipes and everything can be seen. You can see the quality of this thing, uh, the water, where people board the ferry from. And this actually is the dredger in the middle of the river, which mainly looks like this particular the extent of this looks like what you can see, which is above water. But if you can follow these pipes actually follow through the entire river, not the entire, but in this stretch it will go on to the if you can see the island charts which are getting formed because of this thing. So what they're doing is they are taking sand out from here, and through a system of connected pipes, they're throwing it here. We could also see some leakage in these pipes, but this is another sort of island making which was happening on National Waterway 2 in February. And if you see like this particular structure, this is held from both sides. Like underwater, there are like big sort of ropes uh, which hold this treasure from both sides so that it doesn't it has to be secured, and which we were told from the official who was handling the treasure is a very dangerous sort of a thing for fisher people. If they cross the river when the dredging is happening, there are high chances that there could be accidents because of these activities, because again, like turbidity increases and you have all these things underwater which are not visible from naked eye. So these are again like some certain things that we need to think about.
Yeah, I think this is very enlightening. And I think the next question or sort of point that we wanted to talk with you about was on environmental clearance processes around, and that's something also Ashutosh has also asked in chat, that what are the clearance processes, or if an impact assessment is conducted before declaring it a waterway. And maybe we can sort of also open it up to questions after you answer this.
Yeah, very briefly, I can talk about it. We've done some we've documented these things in our papers, in our writings also. So maybe like we can put those in the chat as well later. But the environment clearance, like of course there are so many impacts. Of course, like these things are being talked about in the expert appraisal committee when they speak about, like for example in 2017, like when they were, or in 2015, before this National Waterways Act was passed, for Ganga waterway, there was this one particular incident when they were only doing periodic dredging for transportation of coal from Sagar to Farakka in Ganga waterway. But the EAC emphasized that you're doing periodic dredging, but even this, like even if you're taking material of 1 meter of depth to create, like to dredge it further to maintain 1 meter, it has substantial impact on the river ecosystem, and you need to do continuous studies to make sure that the impacts are assessed and mitigation measures are found for them. So, as such, in the environmental clearance jurisprudence, we follow EIA notification 2006 as amended from time to time. In this EIA notification, and it's very interesting that the national waterways or the waterways are not included per se. These words are not included because in 2006, probably the scope of these interventions were not as much as they are in the current age. But in 2009, dredging was made part as an activity which requires environment clearance, prior environment clearance. So before you begin any work, you need to have legally binding environment clearance, and that is for dredging, which is an integral part of national waterway. So hence, it means that if a major component of your project requires dredging, the entire project also needs environment clearance. But when this Ganga Waterway project came about, and because now it's a World Bank funded project, and when it was taken to the public investment boards, and there were several queries. Ministry of Environment was asked whether environment clearance is required for inland waterways, and whether National Waterway 1 specifically is applicable for prior EC process. And this was when the World Bank loan, like they were already in the talks. They were it was almost like, this is 2017 when this is getting discussed, and the World Bank loan came through in 2018 and the project started. So obviously, probably there was this component of rushing the project and saving it from the environment clearance process. The sort of logic that was applied to it was that this environment clearance, this dredging that we're doing in the river, this is actually helpful for the river. We are doing it for just for the upkeep, and this is mentioned. And again, like the sand mining guidelines were invoked, saying that this is only for the upkeep and for disaster, this thing. So maintenance dredging has been happening in the rivers for years. So, like, how do you ascertain, like, which one, like, from where do you want to analyze the environment clearance process? So there were like different sort of logics given, and very clear instructions only came from Ministry of Environment till the time the decision was not taken. Like the final decision had not been taken. And this is what we got to know from our RTI applications, that Ministry of Environment in various office memorandums said it very, very clearly that this project includes maintenance dredging. And there is a clause in the EIA notification when it was amended in December 2009 that if when you're doing capital dredging, you have not incorporated EIA for maintenance dredging, then maintenance dredging would also require environment clearance. So it's exempt, but it's conditional that you employ the mitigation measures, you add it into your project when you're doing the capital dredging for this thing. Now, suddenly, so many waterways were at stake. Suddenly, National Waterway 1 was at stake. So what they did was they went to an expert committee of national expert committee of environment clearance, and they asked the experts as to what they think about this whole process. And this is something that we got from the RTI application. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So what they're noting here for the National Waterway One, the Jalmarg Vikas project, is that the final conclusion of their recommendation, the expert committee, was that this waterway is covered under the EIA notification. That was their interpretation. And this should be appraised. Like the recommendation is that you appraise this particular as a category A project. So category A project requires maximum, like it requires the maximum scrutiny when it comes to environment clearance. It's appraised at the central level. And so that kind of scrutiny be appraisal be followed for this project, and with reference to the specific issues addressing river as a living entity, which is a beautiful way of employing the work which has been the scholarship which is getting developed around rivers. So they had put river as a living entity, changing hydrology, riparian rights, transboundary impacts, protection of banks and floodplain zones in the rivers. They very categorically explained that maintenance dredging involved in this project cannot be exempt from environment clearance, as the project so far has not obtained any prior environment clearance as provided in column 5 of item 7E of the EIA notification, which was amended in December 2009. So not only
Avli,
that,
sorry to sort of interrupt in between. We just do have a couple of more questions and we're a little bit short of time. So maybe if you can wrap up in two more sentences and we can take the other questions as well.
yeah, sure,
Thank
sure, sure.
you.
Sure. So I just wanted to show you this particular statement, which I think is very important in terms of showing what is not addressed when the decision was taken in 2017 through a simple office memorandum that all national waterways, it was a discussion for National Waterway One, but the conclusion or the result of the sort of arm twisting for keeping National Waterway One from environment clearance process was that all National Waterways project or inland waterways projects are now exempt from maintenance dredging, which means that maintenance dredging aspect, which could lead this whole project to be included in the EIA notification, is now exempt from any sort of prior environment clearance, and hence no questions can be asked as to what kind of mitigation measures are being, there's no monitoring, there's no independent assessment.
Yeah, I think very nicely you've highlighted all the processes and all the sort of ways they're trying to use and allow for a lot of these development projects to happen. Seher has asked a question if was there any rationale given by the government for declaring more than 100 rivers as waterways, and does the proposal to turn rivers into waterways have any real need in your opinion?
That's a very interesting question, and I wish I had there's a new report in the parliament which was released last year, and it was on development of new national waterways in the country. And it's a parliamentary report. It's under Rajya Sabha's Committee on Transport. And I'm just quoting that because it doesn't look like I'm saying things and it's my this thing. I'm just telling what I'm reading in the reports which are official. So this report very beautifully says that put that and I'm paraphrasing, of course. I don't remember exact words. It said that the whole the whole act of declaring so many waterways without doing any technical or financial viability assessments for these projects has put them in a very interesting but sad state of affairs, which is where now the central government has found that more than 60 national waterways are not even viable. Um, so they have found that these are not going to work for them in terms of bringing economic or financial viability or any sort of rate of returns. Uh, so now they are now abandoned, is what the parliamentary report is saying, that you've put like all these rivers, you've converted that into waterways. Now a lot of requests, not a lot of work which state government was actually taking care. Now that is hampered because they have to get permissions from National Waterways, Inland Waterways Authority of India. There's so many things that they have to go through, which is why they also don't want to take the onus of doing any kind of development or regulating those waterways. Now, so it's a very important question, which we had discussed in office also, Seher, at many times, saying that there was no, and there are like reports as well, media reports which highlight how various states actually objected and they wanted something else in the uh, some other stretch of the national waterway to be included, but some other stretch has gotten included in the National Waterway Act. So yeah, I think that sort of binds that question.
Yeah. We're at 6, but we still have a couple of questions. And if you can, I'll request others. We'll just extend this by a couple of minutes because the discussion has been quite interesting and the questions are also quite interesting. Urvashi has asked, is the Waterways project taking any steps to mitigate the negative impacts, at least even officially?
See, you will take impacts assessment. Of course, by their logic, they're doing everything which they can. But if in your official, like the very first frequently answered question, which was released in the Jalmarg Vikas project's implementation, it said that there are no impacts on any aquatic species. But if you haven't assessed those impacts, if there are no studies, no experimental studies, no long-term studies to actually scientifically try to understand the impacts, there is no independent assessment of these things, then how would we know if there are impacts or no? And how would we know that the mitigation measures that they have mentioned on paper, because they're not part of the environment clearance process, how do we make sure that those are also like in followed in spirit?
Absolutely. There is one question by Ashutosh. He says in-stream sand mining is not allowed in most states, but in-stream dredging seems a necessity for the waterways project. Don't you think it's a contradictory stand by the government?
It's not only contradictory, but if you see, there's a latest tender on the Inland Waterways Authority of India's website, which is for dredging in Ghagra River, which is in UP. And this is true for like, even if you look at the tenders now which are released for Brahmaputra or for the Amba River, what they're saying is that the sediment which is which is dug from the fairway, it has to be put back in the river itself. Like if you've seen dredging activity through these links that I shared, through a pipe they're putting it back in the river itself, and whatever is left, it's either put into experimental use, closing secondary channels, which I think leads to a lot of urban flooding. They're closing that's the measure that they have given in their tenders, that you can use it to close secondary channels, you can use it for bank protection work, which is to say that the dredging material that you're taking, you will put it back on the banks, and this material can also be polluted. So how do you determine like what you're doing with it? So in stream dredging, and in many cases, like there is, for example, in the Kochi metro case, they applied for environment clearance. It was again like externally funded project, but they had to apply for environment clearance, and dredging is a part of it, which means that even if it's happening in stream, the sediment monitoring is happening on the fortnightly basis, which is the beauty of putting these projects under a clearance regime. And these information, they have to give this information in public domain also, so that you and I, we can also go and check if those reports are up. And similarly, disposal, you can't do dredging in the fish breeding season. So that's another clear sort of specific condition put for Kochi Metro. They've also asked interestingly, they have also said that the sand that is extracted can also be used for beach nourishment, which is a new sort of a thing. But they've said that you also need to scientifically assess the sediments before putting it on the beach as well. So there are different ways in which this is being dealt, and there's no clear this thing for many of the waterways which are part of which or whole of which are not part of the environment clearance process. It's very unclear and confusing, because many a time the practice which happens on ground, we have seen, is something different than what is promised on paper.
Yeah. We have one question from Ashutosh around successful examples of inland waterways, and I think Ravi has answered that in chat. The Danube River, Mississippi, Nile, and dates in UK, USA, and Canada. Uh, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, like these rivers do have developed their traffic on waterways. Like
Yeah.
there is considerable traffic on Mississippi, on Danube, on Seine. But you also have to keep in mind that that development took almost a century. Like if you start reading about the history of development of waterways on the Mississippi and the measures they have adopted and the erasure that has happened, like you would see like that was not problem free, like of or how China has sort of gotten to the point of having such high percentage of traffic flowing, getting transported through the river. uh, it hasn't happened without its impacts. So the learning shouldn't be that because they have done it we should do it, but the learning shouldn't be that okay, they have done it, but what did they got wrong, what did they get right, how can we learn from them better, rather than implementing the same thing uh, on Indian rivers, which are very, very polluted, stressed. And also, we are not even talking about impacts due to artificial light in the river ecosystem. If you want night navigation, if you want to do dredging in uh, nighttime, and also like what about sound? What about climate change? Like all these things, when you're not even addressing the adverse impacts which can happen because your ongoing activities, then how would you get into all these tangents and think about these things?
And there's one last question that we'll take. That's from Ria, and she's asking: are there any attempts to divert water from other rivers to increase water, so that the creation of waterways is suitable for transport?
I don't remember anything that I've seen on paper. I've heard about it from people, but that's anecdotal and I wouldn't like to like add it here. But
Okay.
yeah, no, I don't have anything in this regard.
Yeah, thank you for really insightful discussions. Very great study. I think Ravi has added if there's some reference to the interlinking of rivers project.
There is a reference in the sense that all these projects, like when they're talked about, uh, there's no interlinking of rivers and waterways sort of uh, coincidence happening, but like all these projects are talked about in the same manner. I think the approach is very, very similar, that we spoke about it at some point in the past, and we're not really thinking about the ways in which we can think about making our processes more efficient and transparent, and using different lens to understand this. I think interlinking project and waterways project is same in the aspect of what it sort of promises, but in both of these we have seen very little benefits, and very little benefits to the people who are living on the edges of rivers, who are living with the rivers.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's a sort of a good point to sort of pause and reflect on some of these points as we go ahead. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Avli, for a really nice conversation. We'll request everyone to look up and check out Manthan's work. We'll share the link on the chat. We'll also request you to also check out the project that we're doing, India Sandwatch. You can also follow India Sandwatch and also follow Avli on social media. We just had one more thing that we wanted to talk about is that on August 13, India Sandwatch is completing 1 year, and we'll be hosting an event online. We'll share its details soon. And if you're interested, you can even write your names in the chat so we will make sure that you get the invite. Uh, Anything else? Any last points from you, Avli?
No, not really. It just that it's very interesting to understand like this kind of interventions which are happening in the rivers, and also try to understand like how sand is, I don't know, like it's such a uh we don't we find it as very like isolating from us, but in so many ways, if we look at lives around rivers or in coastal spaces, I mean that plays a very hidden, invisible kind of role. And it's important, like I would like to thank you for bringing these stories out, so that we're also building our understanding on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, everyone. We'll stop the recording now.